Welcome back, everybody. We've got a very busy and likely historic day and night in store for a lot of Americans. So obviously the big elephant in the room today is Hurricane Idalia, likely to make landfall in the Florida Big Bend within the next 12 to 18 hours. So obviously a lot to talk about here with Idalia, and this entire video will be dedicated to that. So if you're not likely to be impacted by Idalia, I do apologize. Don't really have much for you in this video, but unfortunately this is just such a dangerous situation, and we really just have to focus all of our resources on it. So that is definitely what we are going to do in today's video. Now, if you are new here and you haven't already subscribed, definitely consider doing so and like the video, as that really helps get this video out into the algorithm, and it just allows it to reach more people and really gives us a better shot at getting that warning out. So that is oh so important to delivering this weather forecast. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it because, again, I know a lot of people are probably a little stressed out, maybe a little worried, and really just want the information. So let's go ahead and give it to you. Now, taking a look at satellite imagery right now, there's obviously, a couple things that we're looking at. Hurricane Franklin out here, luckily, he's really just going to move on out to sea, although a beast of a hurricane he is, and is definitely bringing some rough oceans near the East Coast. No direct impacts from him. Now, this is the big story. This is Hurricane Idalia now really just kind of a bit west of Fort Myers, Florida, continuing to move northward before eventually overnight tonight and into the early morning hours of tomorrow, curving into the Big Bend of Florida, and unfortunately bringing with it major hurricane impacts, including up to 12 feet of storm surge. So again, really unfortunately a very dangerous situation, and she won't stop there as she continues her march inland towards the Carolinas and Georgia. So again, as we look at current radar imagery and all of these watches and warnings, there is just a lot going on out there. So again, we're seeing rain from not necessarily directly from Idalia here, but kind of really the general idea of it, same general energy, now all the way moving up into places like Augusta, Georgia. So again, a very wide-reaching impact. This is the center of the storm. You can see very clearly kind of this eye feature now beginning to set up shop with this very impressive banding, and these bands already moving into Florida. So right now, we're definitely seeing some of these tropical downpours with likely some tropical storm force gusts mixed in there, working their way already into south central Florida, moving on through Cape Coral, Port Charlotte, even up towards Sarasota, St. Petersburg right now. And these lines, or these feeder bands, if you will continue to swing on through the state through the next couple of hours, and will begin to slowly improve throughout the overnight hours for our friends down in southern Florida, but will only then begin to worsen for folks back up towards the Gainesville area, Jacksonville, Florida, and just the Big Bend area as a whole as this storm begins to make landfall. So again, a very impressive structure on radar, and is likely now really going to be able to really begin that rapid intensification process. I think over the next 12 hours, as this makes landfall tomorrow morning, we're going to see a very strong, very potent, very impressive looking storm on satellite imagery, all due to this very warm Gulf of Mexico water, plenty of moist air ahead of this storm, and an overall lack of wind shear. So again, we have this stalled kind of front out over the southeastern part of the country. That is causing some showers up towards Charlotte and up towards Raleigh. And also, due to this hurricane, we're getting flow in off of the Atlantic a bit stronger than we might normally see. So again, all of this rain that we're seeing in the southeast right now is really at least somewhat responsible, all due to Idalia spinning away down here in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, that's what we're seeing out there right now, and things likely only to go downhill from here. Now, taking a look at satellite imagery, this is the hurricane. Again, you'll notice this kind of eye feature beginning to kind of think about exposing itself a little bit here. So that eye wall beginning to get some very strong storms around it, including some lightning, which again is often a sign of intensification in hurricanes, and many studies have been done on that. And again, just look at how this general structure is. We're getting plenty of kind of this fire hose of moisture out of the Caribbean and out of the Atlantic into Florida with this really impressive feeder band on the outside of the storm right now. And again, this will likely, as this swings up into Florida, bring with it the chance of some tornadoes, very gusty winds, and a lot of torrential downpours. So again, continuing to organize here on satellite, continuing to get stronger, and we'll continue to only do that even more throughout the overnight hours. Alrighty, so let's take a look at the current track from the National Hurricane Center. Again, current stats on this thing as of about 2 o'clock this afternoon, up to 90-mile-an-hour winds, which gets that up to that Category 2 strength just about now, and wind gusts up to 105 miles an hour. So obviously very strong winds, pressure down to 974 millibars for you weather nerds out there, which pretty much just tells us this storm is continuing to strengthen and has a lot of energy with it to help to bring that wind and as well as that storm surge, which is oh so important when forecasting these hurricanes. All right, so latest forecast as well from the National Hurricane Center. About 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, we'll be knocking on the doorstep, moving inland into the Florida Big Bend with winds upwards sustained at 125 miles an hour, gusting up to 155, 160 miles an hour. So again, very strong winds here. This is going to cause a lot of damage with just the wind itself within the eye wall, but also that wind responsible for moving the ocean inland with that storm surge, which is really the costliest part of these hurricanes as they move ashore. Now, as we go into tomorrow afternoon and evening, likely a still very strong tropical storm, still almost near hurricane strength, with sustained winds getting up near 60 to 70 miles an hour as this pushes through southern Georgia and into South Carolina, and winds gusting up to hurricane strength. As we go into the early morning hours of Thursday, a bit weaker at that point, likely a low-end tropical storm, but still producing widespread tropical storm winds. And often what we see with these systems is as they kind of get inland, that wind field expands. So the strong winds kind of come down, but then kind of go out into the outer perimeter of the storm. So we could have a pretty big shield kind of around these circles of that tropical storm force winds, potentially seeing those as far inland as Columbia, South Carolina, Augusta, Georgia, even up towards areas to the south and east of the Charlotte metro, likely to see tropical storm force winds out of this storm before finally going into our overnight Thursday and into our Friday. The storm finally pulls away from land and that nice fall air funnels in behind it before eventually it's looking more and more likely that this storm will wrap back around. The good news with that though is again this is going to bring in a lot of dry air behind it. That's going to kind of get ingested into the storm and will likely have more of a tropical wave than anything should this turn back around and kind of move back towards the southeast coast. So taking a look at those spaghetti models, again, all but certain landfall kind of into the Big Bend today, kind of near Cedar Key, maybe a little bit to the north and west of Cedar Key. As we go into tomorrow afternoon and evening, moving through southern Georgia, again, still bringing very strong winds, likely going right over, if not just north of Savannah, and then eventually moving over Beaufort, South Carolina into the Charleston area, and then exiting back over the open Atlantic, somewhere near Wilmington or Myrtle Beach. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about storm surges. This is just really the most important part of most hurricanes, including this one. So quickly, let me go ahead and run you through the key here. Any colors you see in red means water is going to be 9 feet or more above ground level. Orange means more or equal to 6 feet above ground level. Yellow, 3 feet, and then blue, 1 foot. So that's your key here. Let's go ahead and now zoom into some of these communities and give you an idea of what we are looking at. So obviously, this storm expected to kind of come into the Big Bend here, and anytime you're forecasting surge in a hurricane, it's that right front quadrant that is going to see the worst of the surge. So as that wind is wrapping around this hurricane, as it's moving inland, it is going to be pushing massive amounts of Gulf water into this Big Bend region of Florida, specifically kind of near the Cedar Key area. Now, the flip side of that is you get the wind on the backside, a place like Panama City, back up towards Destin. Likely, we're going to see a lot of water kind of recede. You might see the ocean even open up a little bit as that water, again, is getting pushed offshore by those strong offshore winds. So, moving this in, again, we'll go ahead and kind of go into a place like Tampa. Tampa, especially kind of up here near Safety Harbor, Oldsmar, Citrus Park area is where we're going to see the worst of this surge, as, again, we're getting that very strong southerly flow that will definitely bring some water into Tampa Bay here. Likely, the worst places we'll see about 6 feet of surge. So obviously, if you live in one of those low-lying areas that is prone to surge, that is a problem, but as a whole, relatively manageable in Tampa. It's once you kind of get north of Pinellas County here into kind of the Hudson area, Spring Hill, Florida, and surrounding areas is whenever the surge really becomes quite impressive. And at this point, we're going to see miles of land covered with the ocean. So once we start getting up here kind of near Beverly Hills, Florida, and kind of these surrounding counties, this is where the water is really going to push very far inland. So Again, this is moving miles into Florida, and obviously a lot of this is already relatively marshy. You add the ocean into that, it's really just a lot of water to worry about. So this is Cedar Key, Florida, to show you this real quick. Again, look at how far inland this storm surge is pushing, just miles and miles inland. So that's why we have these evacuation orders, and that up to 9 feet, even greater amounts of storm surge will go all the way up here towards Taylor County, Florida, and surrounding areas. So obviously that will be very important to see. And if you are under an evacuation warning, obviously by now you should have already left, and you'll definitely see why whenever we see some of the footage coming out from this hurricane. All right, so let's go ahead and move up back towards kind of Georgia, South Carolina, another place that's going to be dealing with surge. We talked about this, even still near hurricane status, as this will be in southern Georgia. So a place like Savannah, Georgia, we're going to be dealing with some surge here as the water gets kind of pushed up the Savannah River here into a place like Tybee Island, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. Again, a lot of these very low-lying places likely to go underwater from this storm. Moving this up the South Carolina coastline a little bit, kind of down towards Beaufort, South Carolina. Again, storm surge will be an issue. Places getting up to 3, maybe even up to 6 feet of surge just due to the location here. And again, a lot of water going to be flooding in here. And this is really just kind of an unfortunate thing to see, especially as a South Carolina resident myself. I've visited a lot of these places, and you just know it really sucks for these communities to have to deal with this. So a place like Charleston as well. Again, Charleston also familiar with flooding and storm surge. So kind of zooming into Charleston City itself, definitely plenty of places here on the outskirts will definitely be seeing some impacts here from storm surge, but specifically back out kind of towards Isle of Palms and those lower lying areas between the mainland back towards Mount Pleasant and some of these more resort islands could also see some pretty extensive storm surge issues. So again, surge will be a problem, even all the way up towards kind of the Myrtle Beach area, where once you get up towards Murrells Inlet, Garden City, the surge issues will begin to die down a little bit as the storm just kind of begins to overall weaken a good bit once we get up into those areas. Alright, so let's go ahead and run you through future radar here. I'm going to quickly move this ahead just to get everything all nice and loaded. So, again, going through this evening, these feeder bands continuing to move into places like Tampa, really passing the midnight hour, even still seeing these rain bands rotating inland from the Gulf as the storm continues to deepen and strengthen. Now, this is whenever we'll get into kind of go time tomorrow. Anytime from about 5 a.m. towards 9 to 10 a.m. is when landfall is expected. And again, very likely kind of here in the Big Bend of Florida is where the storm will move inland. So again, this is whenever those storm surge impacts will be the worst for you folks there in the Big Bend. This is when the wind will be the worst as the eye wall is coming ashore during the early morning hours. Now, eventually this thing will finally move inland, and this is when we kind of shift towards less of a surge threat as this kind of begins to move further inland, and more of a heavy rainfall and heavy wind threat. Again, hurricane winds are likely pretty far inland into Georgia here as this storm continues to turn away and still has plenty of meat left in it, if you will, to continue to pump out those very strong winds. So getting into about the noon hour, likely this storm crossing the Georgia state line, getting into southern Georgia, and this is when we'll also run into a bit of a tornado threat. So, kind of any of these bands on this side of the storm that are rotating inland on the eastern side of the storm, we have to watch for rotation, have to watch for some isolated tornadoes, and still very strong winds as well. Going into tomorrow afternoon, likely the core of this storm still over southern Georgia, but that big rain shield with very heavy rain on the northern side of it moving into Augusta, Columbia, South Carolina, and still running into tornado threats as well as these bands rotate very well inland. Now going further into tomorrow, about towards sunset, still it's rocking and rolling in Augusta, Columbia, South Carolina. Winds up into tropical storm strength and very heavy rainfall as well, even along the I-20 corridor, back towards Florence, back towards Wilmington, and again, still dealing with that tornado threat. Now, the good news is by the time we get into tomorrow afternoon and evening, we should begin to clear out behind the storm, as again, I think it's going to begin to finally kind of ingest some of that drier air behind it, which will help to kind of bring down some of the flooding threat behind the center, but that also increases the tornado threat just because we add a little bit better of some of those ingredients, if you will. I guess it's just the easiest way to word that. Now going into tomorrow evening, finally moving into South Carolina, likely just north of kind of the Beaufort area, and at that point still a very heavy rain shield over Columbia, Florence, and areas to the south and east of the Charlotte metro, also getting in on those tropical storm force winds and very heavy rainfall throughout the evening hours, then moves up into eastern North Carolina overnight Wednesday into early Thursday, and finally begins to weaken and move offshore going into our Thursday afternoon. All right, so taking a look at winds, again, the winds will begin to get worse as we go through the night tonight into the Florida Big Bend. Before landfall tomorrow morning is whenever we will likely see those sustained winds in the eye wall up near 120, 130 miles an hour. So very destructive wind there, and this wind will continue pretty far inland. So anytime you see kind of these yellow colors, and especially these kind of brown colors, that's indicating to me we're going to get gusts up near hurricane force strength. So you'll notice tomorrow afternoon, as this is moving through southern Georgia, still very strong winds moving through up, gusting towards hurricane strength, but sustained at tropical storm strength. Now, as we go into tomorrow evening, again, I'm very worried about you folks in Augusta, Columbia, throughout the Midlands of South Carolina, even into the low country. We're going to see very widespread tropical storm force winds. Again, gusting potentially up towards 60 miles an hour in a place like Columbia. That is quite a big deal. That combined with all the rain we're going to see, those Carolina pine trees just won't be able to handle that. And unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of power outages very well inland as the storm continues to crank away. And even up in a place like the Charlotte metro, could gust to tropical storm force, and we could see some downed trees, especially from all the rain we've already seen this week, really saturating those soils, and that is going to cause problems. Now, as we go into later on into the early morning hours of Thursday into Thursday afternoon, those gusty winds then finally move off towards eastern North Carolina, and the storm will begin to weaken from there on out. Rainfall totals, widespread, half a foot of rain likely wherever the core of this thing goes. Right now, I think anywhere between Columbia, South Carolina, and kind of into the Orangeburg, South Carolina area, that kind of corridor down into areas south of Augusta here, and into, obviously, where it makes landfall in Florida. But that rain shield will continue all the way up into southeastern North Carolina, into Wilmington, Fayetteville, Jacksonville, North Carolina, and surrounding areas. So again, tomorrow we will have a tornado threat as well. Again, a pretty substantial one for the low country of South Carolina, sandhills of North Carolina, and even the beaches of Georgia, as again, these kind of feeder bands rotate inland and have plenty strong enough kinematics associated with this tropical system to produce tornadoes. Alrighty, so again, this was a gauntlet, sorry about that, but that's kind of what we're looking at here in general with Hurricane Idalia, or Idalia, if you will, as that kind of moves inland. So again, going to be a very dangerous situation. Did want to end the video with a little bit of good news, as I was talking about that drier air that will likely wrap around the hurricane as it kind of finally begins to move inland and back offshore, is going to actually lead to very nice weather along the East Coast going into our Friday and Saturday. So just in time to kick off September, we're going to have really nice, almost fall-like weather, with temperatures, being pretty well below average, as well as just very nice, comfortable air. So that's kind of your one little tidbit of good news to end the video here. Now, I know this one was a little bit long to just only be talking about one storm, kind of around about 18 minutes or so it looks like right now. So again, I appreciate y'all hanging in there with me. And of course, like I said earlier, if you haven't already subscribed, definitely consider doing so and like the video if you like it. With that said though, again, make sure you keep Florida and Georgia as well as the Carolinas in your prayers tonight. And of course, just have a great rest of your night in general. And I will see you all next time.